The Kosher Kitchen was a startup before that term became in vogue.
They were young Jewish people who were interested in creating this alternative lifestyle coming out of that hippiedom in the late 60s and early 70s.
It was unusual for a progressive or radical activist group to be working in the Jewish community. What motivated me was the large forces that were going on around me, the politics of unions, the politics of food.
There wasn't something that allowed Jews, young Jews, to live together, to work together, to try to make an impact on the Jewish community.
It was a vision-driven idea where people were so committed to this notion of an anti-profit collective where people came together and served the Jewish community.
This was a step towards revolutionary change. You organize around unmet needs of a community. And there was no kosher restaurant in Washington. I said, great, we could do it around kosher food, around values that are important.
People were devoted to this cause that was really bigger than just running a restaurant.
It wasn't only about food, it was about raising consciousness.
It was another job representing my values, and so this was a place I could go and feel very comfortable.
It was a sort of gregarious, open, friendly place, so we enjoyed it.
We were very naive in a way, but we took it all really seriously. We were very passionate about it.
It had its challenges, like all startup organizations, but I think it left a lasting impact on the landscape of the Washington Jewish community.
I grew up in suburban Maryland, middle class, Jewish family, Jewish community, synagogue-based, Jewish camps.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei b'riyah gafen.
I grew up in Langley Park in Silver Spring, and I felt very much part of the Jewish community. I got involved with United Synagogue Youth. I worked right away through college by being a Hebrew school teacher, a bar and bat mitzvah teacher, a youth advisor to different youth movements. And I felt Jewish. I've always felt Jewish.
Everybody touch their fingers like Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem haaretz. Okay.
Ya'alo sadai v'chol asher bo.
As a young adult, I was not becoming the person I thought I was going to be when I was little. I wanted to make a difference in the world. Living my Judaism had much to do with much broader values.
We want peace! We want peace! At the time, the people in the 60s, people my age, were demonstrating all the time. And I felt committed to everything. To stop the war in Vietnam, to help people in Biafra, to help Soviet Jews, to help Israel. I demonstrated civil rights. I demonstrated for so many different things all the time. For me, it was part of my identity.
In Philadelphia in the first part of the 70s, I was living this very rich Jewish alternative life, somewhat involved with Jewish feminism, demonstrating for Soviet Jews as much as against the war. I ran the kitchen of a camp in the Poconos, learned how to do institutional cooking, and a lot of my friends were talking about creating small communities around either food or culture.
After university, I decided that I wanted to see the world. And I spoke to a girlfriend at the time and another good friend, Bill Dolnick. And so the three of us flew to England. We hitchhiked all over Western Europe, Northern Europe. We took a train to Moscow, Warsaw, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Austria, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey. And when we were in Romania, we got to the town of Cluj. Cluj is a fairly sizable town. And I went to the Jewish community and they said, okay, great, we'll find a place for you to sleep and come with us to dinner. And they took us to a small kosher restaurant. And in the restaurant, there were old people, young people, students, and they made us feel like we were in a community. They hugged us, they shook our hands, they looked, they talked to us, they were excited that we were there. It was a great feeling. And in the middle of it, I realized what I wanted to do when I grow up, what I wanted to do when I get back to America. And that was to start a restaurant that had the same feeling of community. But I want to do it on values that I feel connected to.
It was sort of a common vision of building a structure for organizing in the Jewish community around values and around politics, and centrally around food, because food is what brings people together. At that time, there was no kosher restaurant in the Washington, D.C. area. It was a real need for the community. It was 8 years without a kosher restaurant.
And Saul Alinsky, who's now a fairly famous community organizer, said you organize around unmet needs of a community.
So we created a place, a nonprofit restaurant with good food that cost very little. And creating a nonprofit restaurant, it's the perfect organizing hub.
People will always want food. Finding interesting ways to present it at an angle, it will always draw people to you. And yeah, maybe we were onto something by using food to organize for a cause or social change or justice. We had a pretty good idea.
It was part of a political movement around food and about educating people around basically socialism and using food as the tool to do it. And I think we really got the message across at the Kosher Kitchen because it was warm, it was friendly, but we had the mission, and the mission was really important to us, always.
There's this notion that we develop community around a table. When we sit around a table and eat, we share ideas and we develop bonds that we don't normally build.
Food is a way to break down barriers and open up doors, and that was one of the purposes of the restaurant, was to improve communication, and food did it. And the fact that it was kosher allowed the broadest range of people to come into the restaurant. They would never have been in the same room with them if there wasn't the lure of the food.
Right.
And
a great bowl of chicken soup with matzah balls.
It was great food, except for the flunken.
They loved the flunken. I don't get that.
I think one of the things I really liked was bringing the community in. I mean, I'm sure people ate at the kitchen who are middle class, upper class, Republicans, Democrats, independents, and they all got to experience in an immediate way what these values were. So it wasn't just a bunch of liberal young leftists talking to ourselves.
We spent about a month or two looking for a location. And it wasn't very easy because we didn't have a lot of money. We couldn't pay a lot of rent. We had no expectations. We had no idea how much money would be coming in. So we found a coffee shop, the El Dorado Towers in White Oak. And it was very small, it was very crammed.
The space that we found is blocked off now, but it was about this size. Counter was here. Kitchen was here. From the corner. Yeah.
Both facilities that the kitchen used were both in the basement of Hampshire Tower. We all suffered from, seasonal affective light disorder, but all the time. One of the really interesting pieces was sort of the journey that people had to go through in order to just get to the restrooms, which were sort of down a dingy hall and then down another dingy hall.
Oh, it was in a dark basement. It was definitely a little letdown when you walked into the place. It was so informal that it was funny in many cases. Sometimes if there was no room, you'd sit next to someone else so you didn't even know because your table was taken, but that's okay. You just got to know the person next to you when you sat and talked. So it was almost like a family.
We were looking for places in Washington where we would be able to go for a meal outside. And since we would not eat in a non-kosher facility, the fact that the Kosher Kitchen had opened was a reason for us to go there and maybe go with other friends as well. It was a terrific location. New York kosher restaurants were much more formal than the Kosher Kitchen. The nice thing about the Kosher Kitchen was it was just much more comfortable and much more friendly.
It was wonderful. It was warm and it was fun. It was just a really good feeling, almost like inviting someone into your home. My friends loved it, I loved it, my family loved it. It was special.
Another one. I guess set the framework. I said collective, not-for-profit, community-based, worker self-management, kosher. If you could agree to that, then great, welcome. In the beginning, I had recruited many of my friends.
I was actually kind of recruited to come by Ira, one of the founders, who was, a close friend and with whom I had traveled. We wanted to provide social services, and we needed a certain amount of legitimacy to get support from the institutions of the Jewish community of Washington. I had a social work degree. I was interested in community organization. That's what I had been doing both in social work school and before. So Ira was reeling me in with that, and the other bait, he says, I really want to fix you up with Rachel, who's his co-founder.
I was attracted to living collectively from my second year of college. I left the dorms. I went and lived in a house that was doing political work. And then I went and lived on kibbutz, which was a commune. And the kitchen was another communal environment which reflected my politics.
I heard about it, went, had dinner, and fell in love immediately, and immediately raised my hand and said, this is something I want to be a part of. The attraction was multifold. It was people working together. It was working for ideals that I held. It was the Jewish environment that wasn't particularly religiously oriented, but more culturally oriented. I grew up in a family that was socialist, Yiddishist, and I just loved perpetuating that in some way.
I sat down at the counter, and right in front of me was some equipment that I recognized because my father was in the delicatessen business. And I said, oh, this is pretty good stuff. And then I looked at the menu and I see they have pastrami on the menu. So I ordered a pastrami sandwich. And whoever it was who took the order went to the steam table behind them, speared this pastrami, and threw it up on the slicer the wrong way. The fastest way to ruin a piece of meat like that is to cut it the wrong way. Instead of being tender and flaky and flavorful, it's shoe leather or shoelaces, depending on what you do to it. So I yelled at him to stop. And I said, get out of the way. I literally pushed him out of the way, washed my hands. I said, here's how you do this. And I showed him how to operate a meat slicer. Turns out these people, for the most part, were vegetarians. And why they decided to open a meat restaurant, not knowing anything about meat, was a little bit surprising. So literally on the spot, I volunteered to show them how to do that side of things in the restaurant.
And Michael became known as Michael Meat because there was another Michael, so Michael had rather famous distinction.
I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, and I was typically the only Jew, or I spent some time in North Carolina, where my father was invited to join the KKK, and that was a real panic. So for me, being the only Jew when I was growing up was really a struggle. And to be involved with other Jews in that situation made me feel more confident, more comfortable. I didn't feel as though I was defending an entire race of people. I felt like I was part of that group. I had started working when I was a kid for social justice issues, trying to get 18-year-olds to vote, the feminist movement and equality for women, and to be working in an environment where men and women were equal, where my Jewish values were being lived, was just so important to me.
I like to cook, I like food. It's a very welcoming place, and it was busy, and they said, okay, can you chop vegetables? And I said, sure. And I chopped vegetables, and they looked at my work, and they went, okay, you can stay. Remember this?
Yeah.
Because I knew how to work in a kitchen.
I had quit school after being at the University of Tel Aviv during the Yom Kippur War, and so when I came back, I was a little bit at loose ends. When I saw the Kosher Kitchen, it was sort of a tug at my heart. Here was a community of young people doing cooking, which I always like to do, and I wanted to be part of almost like a movement.
I was 15, I think, when I first started volunteering at the Kosher Kitchen. And I think I almost immediately went into volunteering every day. The legend is that I dropped out of high school to work at the Kosher Kitchen. I actually didn't. I went for an hour a week, and I got an actual high school diploma. But by then, I was totally immersed in the Kosher Kitchen. Whatever nobody volunteered for immediately, I would grab it up. Everything I did, I was learning something new. And I was also feeling like it had a real purpose.
We used to have almost a trial for new people who started. They had to work 20 hours a week for free. The first 20 hours, they had to volunteer. And then we would sit down with them, and we'd talk about them, and then we'd make a decision if they could be part of the collective or not. And we did not accept everyone, because some people did not have the mindset to work collectively. They were used to having a boss tell them what to do. And if a boss didn't say what to do, they wouldn't do anything. Well, in Hebrew, there's an expression, rosh katan, a small head. We were looking for people who had a rosh gadol, a big head, who could see things for themselves. I have 15 minutes free, and I see this refrigerator is really messed up. I'll make order to it. I will do things that make it better for everyone. And not everyone in America could think that way. Most people in the world can't think that way because they're so used to a hierarchical system where your boss tells you what to do and you don't do beyond that. I believed in equality. I believe that people should all get the same amount of money for their work and that we should manage the business together, worker self-management. And I thought that was really important. And I think you feel much more committed to the organization, to the business, to whatever it is, when you are an equal and you have ownership as well.
So it wasn't like you could just do your job and go home. Supposedly we were to work 40 hours. Well, no one ever worked 40 hours because there was so much to be done. So I think we were far more invested than we would be in any other job. Even when you weren't working, it was your life. It was what you were thinking about, figuring out how we could do it better, what some of the issues were, how to deal with those issues. It was 24/7, but worth it because it was ours and we were creating something.
You could say we exploited ourselves, we overworked ourselves, underpaid ourselves, which caused you often to be tired, wrung out.
I was physically tired at the end of the day because I had been involved mentally and physically, and I like being that kind of passionate and involved in work.
We're not sure when we slept because I was a full-time student in a fairly rigorous science curriculum, and then I was working in the kitchen. And we weren't just working in the kitchen. We built the tables.
Right.
We shopped. Yeah. Everyone did everything. Everyone did what they could do based on their skill set.
Their philosophy was very much like a kibbutz, where everyone had a job and worked, and their hearts were in it, and their values were part of of their lives and whatever they did. So it was nice to see young people growing up like that.
We had decided that every person in the collective would learn to do every job. Everybody cooked, everybody served, everybody took a turn cleaning up, going down to the produce stand on Sunday mornings and coming back with big sacks of vegetables. Everybody did that. And it certainly brought richness to what we were doing, but the quality varied.
And everybody's contribution was not only honored, but critical. We couldn't have weak links because everybody had their role. We used to wash dishes across the hall from the dining area, and it wasn't any sense of like that's like a more degraded thing to do, or where you worked your way up to be a busboy and then worked your way up to be a waiter. There was virtually no hierarchy, and it really came out of a group.
And obviously some people were naturally better cooks than others. Some were better at just running the dining room, making it go smoothly. But there was a matter of principle involved, that we were radical egalitarian.
One was the waiter, and the same waiter appeared to be the washer. There was always kibitzing each other and sort of wrestling with each other about who's going to do this and who's going to do that, and why didn't you do this? And at the end of the day, they would get together and talk about what happened and what they could fix. You could see that they got along well.
Once a week we'd have meetings and we would discuss all these issues. You know, what could we do? What's on the menu? What should we change? It would be easy for one person to make decisions. And okay, well, this is it, this is what we're going to do. And we wanted everything to be on the basis of a consensus. That means people talked and they talked and they talked. And we went around the table again and again until we could have an agreement. So it was not the most efficient way of using our time, but it was a way that people felt they were heard. They had a chance, complete input on every issue, on anything. But a lot of people, it was difficult, and it was a little bit difficult for me. We decided to embark on criticism, self-criticism. At the end of the day, we ate the unedible leftovers that we couldn't serve the next day.
Which was called people's food.
People's food, right. We would go around the room and you would start with yourself. And you'd say, okay, this was my day, and somehow I got caught up on the phone talking to people about something else important with the restaurant, but I didn't have the meal prepared at 6 o'clock. And people started coming in and I was still cooking it. And next time I have to do it better. I have to organize myself, and I have to, what my priorities are. And you would say that because you didn't want everyone else saying that and attacking you. So you would do it yourself first. But also, no, it was really important for people to be able to not just admit that they failed, but to sort of proclaim that they didn't do something right. And that is so against, bureaucratic, hierarchical workplaces. It was really amazing. Then we went around the room, and then you would say, okay, you did this and you did that, and you could have been better, or whatever it is. And it was, to my mind, I mean, not to everybody's mind, it was the best work environment that I've ever been in. To this day, I can say that.
I like the criticism, self-criticism sessions that we had at the end of the day. I mean, we used to make fun of ourselves and make fun of the sessions, and we thought it was kind of funny, a bunch of Jewish kids, mostly Jewish youngsters, sitting around a table in White Oak, Maryland, having this, Maoist practice. But it was a really serious way of trying to consider the work you did, consider the impact you had in other people. And often they were very hard, Now I'm a rabbi, but even back then I had a pretty good Jewish education. The book of Leviticus says we should surely rebuke our neighbor. Maimonides said that this was the hardest of the 613 mitzvot commandments to fulfill. Because to rebuke somebody you care about lovingly and tenderly, very hard.
It was very intense because, first of all, I was young, and it was my way or the highway. And I remember at meetings some very, very intense arguments. There was one over whether the men should keep their head covered to make sure everyone in the community was comfortable. I was a secularist. I found that to be oppressive, and who had the right to tell me to keep my head covered? And so that was difficult.
We always had some conflicts over how commercial we were going to be and what products we would use, whether they were products of just or unjust labor, et cetera, et cetera. But the distributor had Coke in the soda machine. So Coca-Cola at the time, it was a sense of this being this global corporation with tentacles that are all over the world and imperialistic tendencies and blah, blah, blah. So we can't serve Coke. It's a symbol of the decadent imperialist economy. And to me, the Coke controversy symbolizes more of that we can laugh at ourselves, that you can carry some things too far.
We worked together and we lived together, good or bad, and we argued together. So our criticism, self-criticism sessions really were actually, I think, a growing period for everybody. I think, having those stupid arguments led us to be able to look in and see what's important in life.
It made me realize that collective endeavor, rather than abdicating your responsibility to a higher authority and a hierarchy, took tremendous stamina, energy, involvement. You earned your self-management by exercising these efforts.
We began the planning for the Kosher Kitchen knowing that we were going into business, but it wasn't for our own pockets. It wasn't for our own advancement. It was a community service. We had no money of our own, so we needed the support of the community. So we started out making it clear that this would be a nonprofit restaurant.
We raised money from synagogues, from individuals, from organizations. The Jewish Week is the Washington Jewish newspaper. They allowed us to put a half-page description of what we're doing and everything else, and they did an editorial for free that said, this is a great project, these are young people that we should support, you should contribute money so we could have a kosher restaurant in the Washington area.
From my perspective, it was a way to say to the community, we're going to create a kosher restaurant, we're going to provide these services, we're going to provide social services and kosher food, and we can do it without having that profit motive.
For us, it was challenging this notion that we should be making money on certain things, and food was not something we should be making profit on. Food for people, not for profit. Smithsonian Festival of American Folklife wanted culturally appropriate food, and when they were talking to the Marriott about providing kosher meals for the participants, they said, be advised it will triple the price of the food. And they ended up with us because we were a lot less expensive. But that gives you an idea of, if you want kosher, 3 times as much. And we're saying, no, it doesn't have to cost 3 times as much. You can feed people for a reasonable price. And the idea that we could provide an opportunity for the poorest members of society to come out and enjoy something that normally only privileged people do was really important to me too. And so we'd get these, wealthier people coming in and saying, you're not charging enough money. And we'd say, leave a bigger tip.
Most restaurants, when they decide what the price is going to be for the food that they present, they look at all their raw ingredients and all their expenses, and they said, how much can we market this up? What kind of profit can we make? We did almost the opposite. We looked at all the prices and said, how low can we make this? To be honest, I wanted a restaurant that I would feel good at and I would feel comfortable at. So a low-price restaurant that gave you large portions, and if you ate everything, if you ate your appetizer, your soup, your main course, and 2 vegetables, seconds were on the house. We didn't hesitate. Seconds were on there, we would do like some more. Restaurants don't do that. We wanted people to leave feeling good and feeling not hungry. And we wanted to make our prices that would be affordable. And we had all kinds of programs in the kitchen. Someone came and didn't have money, they washed dishes, they got a free meal.
People weren't worried about having to pay because very often if you couldn't find your purse or your money, okay, don't worry, come back tomorrow.
I mean, I was not that wealthy that I was able to go and spend huge amounts of money on some event, and the Kosher Kitchen was right in terms of pocketbook and in terms of the all the ambiance really in the kosher kitchen. So I think that there was no serious question about going somewhere else.
As we evolved our own experience and our own principles around the work we were doing and absorbed other influences, there was a co-op movement in Washington that was quite political, expressly leftist, and we started saying that we were anti-profit. And in some ways, it became a really important conversation. It was a way of talking about our philosophies, our values, our ideals, the way we wanted to live out certain principles.
Well, Kosher Kitchen was anti-profit to make a statement. Anti-profit was saying we had some other values that really stood in contrast to the idea of a profit-making business. It was partly intended to provoke people. And that was a little bit of the spirit of the 60s coming through, I think.
The logical extension of what anti-profit is would be socialism. We chose anti-profit maybe because in America socialism had such a negative connotation that we are afraid to use it. We are really against the whole idea of the capitalist system. I believe in cooperation over competition.
I don't consider myself a capitalist. I am still a democratic socialist. I don't believe that an economic system should serve the people who have the capital. The needs of the community should be paramount. It really was never about the money. It was about the work we were doing and what we were building together.
It was a little bit hard for people to understand what a not-for-profit restaurant, what is that? But a lot of people in the Jewish community felt these people, even if they're crazy, we should support them. For us, as a business, it wasn't so good. There is a contradiction between being an ideological, anti-profit community restaurant and being a business that has to bring in income. We were lucky to finish every year with breaking even. In some years we weren't able to. We had to have concerts, we had to cater things outside, we had to do all kinds of extra things because it was difficult to break even. If there was a bad month, we felt it. And one month we didn't even pay ourselves because we couldn't afford it. And some months we lowered it from our big salary of $100 to $90. Yeah, it would have been a lot easier if we had money in the bank.
The summer of 1976, there was a lot going on. There was the bicentennial. The GSA, I think, was giving out spots on the parade route, and we had an ice cream truck. We were selling ice cream bars for $0.25, and we made over $1,200 with that ice cream truck for the Kosher Kitchen. And we also catered the People's Bicentennial, which was at All Souls Church. We made hundreds and hundreds of sandwiches.
We spent at least a day or two or three on the Folklife Festival. We had one of the Jewish trucks on the Washington Mall where we did this crazy thing and worked for a week or two making 7 million falafel balls. And I remember being totally exhausted. We didn't sleep for like 4 or 5 days. We made some money to support the kitchen, and we're a Jewish presence and an Israeli presence down there. And they were really into that. They came to the Kosher Kitchen. They were really pleased.
So it was important to have a kitchen that was a nonprofit or an anti-profit, but a kitchen that also served the community. It wasn't only about food. It was about raising consciousness. It was about bringing a more meaningful Judaism into people's lives. It was about connecting people in the Jewish community, whether secular or Reform and Orthodox. We wanted to be a place where everyone could come and find some commonality and be nurtured Jewishly in a positive way, which didn't exist very well up to that point. The Jewish community was so fragmented is a perfect word. Fragmented. People didn't know each other. And as I'm reflecting on the kitchen now, there's no other place that was, I think, as respected, as a safe place for Jews of all persuasions to come together.
And I think we created frameworks for that also. The community table, I think the community table was a real important innovation, that we had a table where anybody who sat at this table would be willing to speak to anybody else. And we had Orthodox, conservative, Reform, secular people who weren't Jewish, all kinds of people sitting at this table and talking, and it'd be amazing. Sometimes they would talk the whole evening. And they felt, and also when we were, waiters or whatever, we would often sit down with the people at the table and start talking to them as well. The restaurant was like a restaurant. We made food, served food, people gave us money, great. But I think we also created an experience. It's not just a restaurant. It was something, a culture. That that people, I think, had memories of what they did besides just, I had flunking today.
The notion of bringing all parts of the Jewish community together instead of, the different groups, Lubavitch Jews and with secular Jews. We used to have these incredible conversations because we did have some Lubavitch Jews who were part of the collective. And it was a time when we were really trying to work on feminism and how could Orthodox Jewish women accept all of these binding rules, and they would give us their perspective. And it was eye-opening for me to understand how they felt being Orthodox was liberating. And so we would have these conversations around a table with food. And so that was just from our own experience, but we were hoping to accomplish that with the whole community.
In the 60s and 70s, a lot of mostly younger Jews who yearned for community and spirituality were coming together in new ways. They didn't feel comfortable or welcomed or satisfied with existing religious structures.
I had been involved in Jewish youth activities, but I was a young new leftist, and the organized Jewish community appeared like the establishment to me, and I had nothing in common with them, and I didn't feel that there was a place for me outside of the youth activities. They were controlled by rich givers. If you were young or you were of a different class or had a different perspective on how society should be organized, that they were kind of like the other side.
The establishment Jewish community was just a big turnoff. I felt like it was a closed club that I really didn't want to be part of anyway.
My parents were Holocaust survivors, and so my upbringing was a little fragmented, coming to America on a boat from England when I was 2. So I didn't really feel connected with the Jewish community. It was hard for me to make those connections. But at the Kosher Kitchen, I seriously feel like it was the most Jewish experience I had had up to that point.
For me, it was extremely important that as a Jew, I acted in such a way that mirrored the teachings of the prophets and of the deep teachings about justice in the Torah, and to take it forward, to impact the community by meeting their needs, and also to present our way of looking at the world and restoring Jewish values, to a community that we felt was becoming distant from its core teachings.
When I first came to the collective, it was in the fall right before the holidays. We knew that there were a lot of younger Jews that were not affiliated with synagogues, felt drawn to the holidays, wanted a way to celebrate them, but didn't feel comfortable, weren't going to go to a synagogue, and let's just provide an alternative space. So we drew a group of primarily younger people who this was the space for them to have a meaningful experience of the Jewish high holidays.
So we had the full backing of the Orthodox establishment. We had the full backing of the conservative establishment until we started having services on Rosh Hashanah for our community of young Jews who wouldn't step foot in a synagogue or a temple. They didn't really understand that we were much more than food.
We were shocked one day when we got a letter from the conservative movement that said, no, wait a second, what you're doing is not in the precincts of being a kosher restaurant. You're trying to do something that really belongs to a synagogue. And we were shocked that they saw us as competition to synagogues. These were people who had never, ever joined a synagogue. It wasn't for people who were already going to synagogues. It was not a threat to them, but they saw it as a threat or as a potential threat. And the letter said, you know, we supported you in the beginning, and they did. They were great. The conservative movement was wonderful. But now, if you continue to do this, we're going to have to tell everyone that we no longer support this restaurant. We just couldn't believe it. So we wrote a reply, a fairly serious reply. That, of course, we take everything seriously, and we spent days debating each sentence. That's how we worked.
Very few people have a business where they know in advance that they're going to alienate maybe 90% of the people who could be customers from the beginning, and on purpose. On purpose.
There were some people that walked in and their question was, "What? This is a restaurant?" So they quickly would walk out. And I'm sure there were some that thought to some extent that this is not what they thought it might be.
The Jewish establishment overall looked at us with a little bit of confusion, a little bit of suspicion. It was like, who are these people? They say they want to run a kosher restaurant, but most of them didn't really keep kosher themselves. They say they're, invested in the Jewish community, but they're not members of synagogues. The Jewish quote-unquote establishment, I think, didn't get us.
We had 2 strikes against us. The Jews were suspicious of us because we were leftists, and the left was suspicious of us because we insisted on asserting our Jewish identity. Navigating those shoals was often difficult.
We had speakers about somewhat controversial topics, issues that weren't always talked about in the same way in the official Jewish community. And we were trying to raise people's consciousness. Jewish funeral practices, Jewish feminism, Israel, our support for United Farm Workers. At the time, there was a boycott of non-union lettuce and grapes. United Farm Workers, mostly Mexican Americans, were working in fields all over the country and getting really low wages. And the working conditions were terrible. They were trying to organize. Not every state would recognize their union, and it was a really big struggle. And they called a boycott. And the rabbis in Washington and in Boston and maybe a few other places said that non-union lettuce and grapes is the product of oppressed labor, and that's not kosher. You can't eat this. In the Bible, there are a lot of laws about what is kosher and what is non-kosher, what animals you could eat, what you can't eat, mixing milk and meat together. This was also part of the Bible that tells us how we relate to labor, how we relate to what's fair and what's not fair, what's equal measurements, what should be done by a moral person. And the rabbis interpreted that non-union lettuce and grapes fell into the category of exploitation of something that's not fair. And that is, according to Jewish law, it's against the law. And we took it seriously.
It had to do with that verse in Leviticus that you should not eat food from the
Yeah.
hands of oppressed labor.
Right.
So for us, it
So
was
we
sort
tied
of
it
echo
into
church.
kosher.
We had there's
Oh,
blood
right,
on those
right.
grapes
Right,
poster,
right,
and I can remember I got into a long argument with a customer over whether that poster was unappetizing and therefore shouldn't be in a restaurant.
I remember an old guy with a really strong Yiddish accent. No one would say that they were uncomfortable with us. We don't want to relate to it. Right, I came and I want to eat a good meal. I have to see this kind of I don't want to see this kind of thing. People would tell us that. So there was someone named Arthur Waska. He's an incredible guy. He is an academician. He is very learned, and he wanted to come to speak to us. And he was part of Breira, which was an organization in America that took a stand about settlements and about Israel's need to find a solution and to speak with the PLO. And at that time, to speak to the PLO, which Israel does today, you are a traitor for suggesting that. We had debates. What are we going to do? Because if we did, I felt at least that a good part of the Jewish community would just boycott us, would never come to our restaurant again.
Remember, this was 1976, 7, 8, and this was not, kosher to talk in these terms.
We, I think, only took a vote once in the whole history, and that was for Arthur Waskow, whether should he come or not come.
And then we changed our mind.
And then we changed our mind.
I was the one who had to call Arthur Waskow to tell him we had decided we couldn't have him. And then we called him back and apologized.
He was controversial in the Jewish community at the time.
And he was critical of Israel.
Because he's critical of Israel. Stuff that's like almost mainstream view at this.
Those issues are still very present.
Sadly. Yeah.
Yeah, but they are. And there are young people who are doing the same things as we did.
Yeah. It was the right thing to do. In retrospect, of course it was the right thing to do. But I was very nervous about this decision. And I was worried because I wanted the restaurant to continue.
That was really, really critical in the Jewish community and beyond. People came to hear from the right and the left. And in a Jewish community context, we provided a safe space for people to take these kind of stands.
The values of the Kosher Kitchen were not at all in contradiction to the values of Judaism. In the Torah, in the Talmud, in the commentaries, there is so much about how you have to help the people who needed it.
They were the ones that took a stand and actually stood up for something that they thought was right. They were dedicated, and they were people with strong philosophies of justice and honesty, and it showed through. I think it gave many of us a sense of pride.
In the home I grew up with, Judaism, religious Judaism, was totally compatible with humanitarianism, with civil rights, with marching for full equality for women, for African Americans, for gays. There wasn't any split. And that's what the Kosher Kitchen was about.
We tried to be more than a restaurant, more than chicken soup. We tried to give young adults who are not affiliated a place where they'd feel more comfortable being Jewish.
Let's see, members of the Kosher Kitchen Collective here. How many of you remember eating at the Kosher Kitchen? If you remember eating there, you really didn't eat there. Two members of the band served in the collective 40-some years ago. It's hard to believe. And between Jews for Urban Justice and Verbringen, there were seeds there that I think made it possible for so many of us to find the Kosher Kitchen as a center to live out certain values that we wanted to share with the Jewish community and beyond. And so we made up the original Verbringen fiddlers, and we were also a collective of musicians at the time. So here's the tune that we sang with Verbringeners in those days. Sing to God a new song, sing to God all the earth. Shiru l'Adonai, Shiru l'Adonai, Shiru l'Adonai, Shir Chadai. My sense of impactfulness on the Jewish community also included the revitalization of Jewish life through the arts, and not only through the restoration to prophetic values. When we started the Verbringen Jewish Counterculture Center in downtown DC, the arts were an important part of that, and that's because we felt that to fully and in a healthy way be Jewish was to also involve the arts, and we're talking about music, movement, dance, literary arts. We created a Jewish folk arts society and began dreaming about using the arts to revitalize and revive Jewish life, in the Washington, D.C. area for all Jews, no matter what their denominations or persuasions. Through the arts, we could come together again to express ourselves more fully and naturally and in a more healthy way. So the Kosher Kitchen was a center that took on also this way of seeing the revitalization of Jewish life. We encouraged the arts.
That was another way the Kosher Kitchen left an imprint, and there was an explosion happening of Jewish folk arts, textiles, pottery, painting, and we displayed art in the restaurant, creating alternative opportunities for learning about culture and literature. One night a week was dedicated for folk dancing. Saturday night we'd always have music. We never had trouble booking music at the Kosher Kitchen on a Saturday night. There were musicians lined up to play there, and they would play for free because it was the sense of community, the sense of being part of something. One time I was playing there was a guy washing pots and pans in the kitchen, and it was David Schnare. Now, David Schnare, of course, sings and plays guitar, and he had this little group called the Farbrengen Fiddlers. One Saturday night, David and I got together at the Kosher Kitchen. He brought his guitar, I brought my bass. It sounded great.
We needed a bass player, and there he was, and we also incorporated his sitar playing. We started the whole idea of Jewish raga because of Theo's influence, and he's been a central part of the emerging Jewish folk arts community in the Washington area ever since that.
Now, that was 41 years ago, and I've never left the group, so I guess that worked out.
And at one point in 1977, the Farbrengen community and the Kosher Kitchen and the Jewish Folk Art Society came together to create the first Jewish Folk Arts Festival in 1977, because we had, again, the common vision or the common desire to revitalize the Jewish community also through the arts.
We tried to have something different than what most people would experience in a restaurant.
I was very attracted to the senior population that lived in the building. Between lunch and dinner, they'd come and share their recipes. We offered them free desserts and tea all afternoon. It really became a community center.
After 6 months, we had felt that we were really fulfilling a service. And people would call us up about everything. People who were not that active in the Jewish community, they want to know, what time does Shabbat begin? Where do I go for services? I want to be involved with something. Where do I find a library? All kinds of questions, not just new people in the community, but old people who had never even thought about it. And people would call us up all the time. When we were working, preparing meals, we'd be answering sort of, oh yeah, well, you could go to a synagogue near you, or here's where Israeli dancing is held, or whatever. You know, well, we're supposed to be cooking, and we'd have to stop because we didn't have, you know, hold the phone like this and not be far where the wire could go. So we said, why don't we try to raise money for like a Jewish information line that people could call up with questions about anything. And we went to make a presentation. In the middle of our presentation, we'd written it up, we did everything. And of course, I came exactly from the restaurant, and so I smelled a little like food.
Like chicken soup.
Yeah, exactly. So in the middle of it, someone says, what are we wasting our time listening to these people for? If you have a problem with the restaurant, you come and see us, but not to do other programs? What are you doing here? And our guy started to say, well, wait a second, this is the future. These are people, young generation, that want to be active and involved. You have to listen to them. And one of the people said, you're just a staff person here. We don't have to listen to you or listen to them. And they made me, at least, I'm sure Rachel felt the same way, like we were worth nothing, like all this, that they couldn't care less about us. Now, today I understand, and I was told by other people, if we had presented something to the Federation, they would have been happy to fund us. Of course. They would have said, young people want to be involved and want to do something. They're looking for projects like that. But someone said, the Jewish Social Services Agency could probably use you to do Meals on Wheels to elderly people who can't cook for themselves, who can't get out of the house. That we offer you. So we followed it up, and they did. And we started working in a part of the area that hadn't gotten Meals on Wheels before. And they were quite happy with us, and we had a whole lot of volunteers to deliver the meals to people's homes. And it was really special.
We did that through cooperation with a Jewish Federation agency, Jewish Social Service Agency. A woman who was in charge of those programs was a social worker. I think she understood what we were trying to do. She, in some sense, ran interference with us with the higher level. So there were some allies, several conservative rabbis, but even a few Orthodox rabbis said, they're okay. Let them, maybe they look a little weird, they look different, but they could get what we were doing, having a bigger vision of Jewish community and being a place where it could, flourish.
people wanted to move on. And I eventually said, okay, I've done a lot with middle-class Jews. I'm ready now for something a little bit different. And it was hard for me to see it closed.
You created a business and a social experiment out of your ideas with like 2 cents to rub together and no experience. That's toughness. If you closed in 3 days, you wouldn't be talking about toughness, but it didn't close in 3 days. There was adversity, there was pushback from the community, there was financial adversity. Sometimes the food was an issue. But even in spite of all those obstacles, the place survived for a relatively long time when by all odds it shouldn't have survived for 3 days.
I definitely think it was a success. It planted seeds not only in us, but in our customers. I think it was a statement that your ideals can be lived, you can make a difference.
For what it was in its time, it was a successful experiment in both community and community organization, alternative ways of providing social services. I mean, the kitchen closed after it stopped doing collective management. It had a manager. It was moving more towards a more traditional business model, and that's when it closed, not when it ran, cooperatively, collectively.
It was very sad, to see it go.
I don't think there has been, certainly since the Kosher Kitchen left, another restaurant like it. Do I ever think there will be? No, because I think unless you really have a group of people committed to the community rather than simply doing it as a business, you wouldn't have anything that would match the style and the ambiance and the fervor of the Kosher Kitchen.
The experience that the community had from seeing a group of young, passionate, activist kids committing to their own community, committing to serving their community, and opening up conversation, ideas, discourse, and struggle, and sometimes political struggle, was very important. And I keep hearing people who tell me it really changed their lives to have that happen. It certainly changed our lives.
Part of what the kitchen did was give me a new standard of spiritual engagement. And I've rarely found that spiritual engagement in my everyday life that I found at the kitchen.
They certainly were good examples for the younger people to grow up with, and had these special values so that you could always ask your children to use them as models. And you were proud of them and happy to see whatever they were doing.
I think it was very important to those people who, because they observed kashrut, had nowhere to go if they wanted to go out. So I think that was one piece. I think it was important to a whole group of volunteers and people in the community to whom the Kosher Kitchen became the only Jewish institution they could relate to. I think it was important to those people who were activists because it was another way to engage in activist work in the larger community. And we did real services. I think it was important to the community that was searching for other ways to think about how you could live your life. And I know it was certainly important to everybody who was a member of the kitchen. It marked an experience of people using these very positive values to make an enterprise actually operate, and made dozens, maybe hundreds of people much more conscious of other ways that they could live and be effective in their lives. And if you look at where people who are engaged with the kitchen then, either as members of the collective or volunteers or frequent customers or part of the community, most of the work that they're doing now is still work which met that standard of engaging and enriching the larger community itself.
We are driven by ideals to create this restaurant.
And it was to try to encapsulate values that we felt were really important. And it turns out that most of us, to some degree, still live those values. We have 2 rabbis, we have 4 community social workers, many people who worked for nonprofit organizations. We have 3 people, including Rachel and David, who created nonprofit organizations that still exist today, that still do great things, both in the local community, the national level, and even in the international level.
We didn't just change things in the community. It wasn't just service, but we built something that changed all of our lives. And I would say our kids' lives, I hope, the next generation. That was a great gift.
With a shared vision, anything is possible. We've shared stories with our kids who are all very committed to Tikkun Olam. I'm happy for my kids because I think they've found ways of experiencing that and just being open to possibilities, never saying, I can't do that.
The younger generation is looking for a way that they can also give of themselves, that money is not the most important thing, that they want to help create community, they want to help make a social change, they want to do something for others. I think we haven't seen this in 40 years.
It wasn't like there were scores of people like us at the time either.
Right.
So we were rather unique. And I think, just as there were circumstances that brought us to the table to do what we did, today there are young people who are motivated to do the same. And whether they set up a collective and live in a house, or they have a different paradigm for doing it, they're sacrificing and they're giving of themselves in profound ways.
There's no question that the values that you acted upon and that you instilled in me are the things that motivate me to do the work that I do. But also, I'm inspired by you now. Every day I feel like I talk to you and you're like, I'm going to this march in DC. I'm like, what the hell march is that? I don't even know what that is. You've become really fired up in this moment where we all need to be. And I think you have brought other people along with you. Some of your friends would not be at those things without you. It's political. It's really speaking truth to power. And it's bringing people together to do that. I don't do it quite the way that you did it. The building community was something that you did around the table for the most part, but I do it in my way. And when I think about organizing and I think about what I've done in Baltimore, in many ways, as I have developed this progressive Jewish community in Baltimore that's taking action and doing things, it's also about the relationships and about the community that we're building. In Jewish tradition, we talk about being in partnership with God to make the world as perfect as possible. And I really take that to heart. I feel responsible for trying to make this the best place that we can and doing what we can to take care of one another.
We see young people who are searching for meaningfulness in life in general, and we see young Jews who are searching for meaningfulness in the Jewish community. And it's not so easy to find community and meaningfulness, and to feel that one is having an impact.
A new generation of peace starts with you and me.
Yeah, I think one, as young people, 18 to 30 or something, there's this very powerful window to take risks and to take action. Where when we get older, we have kids, there's other responsibilities that may prevent us from taking those risks. But I think a lot of them are able to give from their hearts, even if the pay isn't there, and are able to really make a huge difference in those communities. Working for social justice really isn't a choice. The other choice would be to run for the hills and try to live by myself and disconnect from the world. But I'm part of society, and I feel I have a responsibility to work, for the betterment of everyone in society. And as a person of privilege, I know that ultimately my own liberation is tied up in everyone else's liberation. I just hope that there's enough time in my life and that I can make use of that time the best way to make enough of a difference, because we have a lot of work to do.
Even though it only lasted a few years, its repercussions have lasted in my life. And I just hope that other people will be inspired by this small microcosm, this very small example of what people can do, how they can make a difference in people's lives and in the lives of a community. Whatever people do, whatever young people do, you don't have to be young to do things. You can be any age, and you can change the world in your own way.
It is absolutely realistic to live by your ideals. Your values and ideals are the engine that drives you forward. I think our activism translates to other generations. And the activism I see today, the powerful urge to make a better world, is very similar to what we did. What we see today in the 21st century is an outgrowth of new activism, new commitment to anti-racist ideals, sometimes interfaith ideals, to working for change, working for a more equitable and just world. I think you see that all through history. It's in many ways the best part of being human. And when that can be experienced in a community, it's never a failure. It always creates ripples of change.
To lose but your chains, 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 but your chains. All together now. Oh, workers of the world unite. You got nothing to lose but your chains. Oh, workers of the world unite. You got nothing to lose but your chains, 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 but your chains. Justice for farmer workers, you got nothing to lose but your chains. Justice for a farmer worker, nothing to lose but your chains, 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 but your chains. Musicians, take it solo. Justice for farmer workers, you got nothing to lose but your chains. Justice for a farmer worker, nothing to lose but your chains, 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 but So we're going to dance you out a little tune, okay? Be safe on the roads tonight. Yalla, 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 yalla. Special thanks to Noel, the theater director. Thank you, Noel. La la la.